Hello and welcome to From Misfit to Mystic. Get ready for my unfiltered, off-the-cuff, raw and real radio show that puts evolutionary leaders from all over the world into the spotlight. Leaders who have taken themselves from feeling unseen, unworthy, and out of place to becoming unapologetic for who they were born to be. I'm your host, Lisa Dawn Lajoie, and we will be digging into the victorious impact that these powerful change makers give to the world with their purpose, how they monetize their magnificence daily, and how they confidently stepped into co-creating the life of their dreams. Now let's dig into today's episode. Hello, friends. Welcome to From Misfit to Mystic. I'm very excited about today's guest, Kimberly Berry. This is a subject near and dear to my heart. We are going to be talking about mental health issues today and her experience and story and personal dive into making change around this subject. Kimberly Berry is the founder of Being UnNormal, a coaching and advocacy group that assists people navigate the world of mental health. She is also the host of the podcast Being UnNormal, which explores issues within the mental health community, including children's mental health issues. Kimberly is a sought-after speaker and coaches individuals on subjects such as personal and professional development, with an emphasis on parenting children with behavioral health special needs. She is the producer of the Adolescent Mental Health Summit, which takes place in Camas, Washington, tackling tough subjects like suicide and depression. She's absolutely a total powerhouse, and I'm really excited to introduce you to her brilliance. Honestly, absolutely incredible. Kimberly brings her over 20 years of corporate nonprofit leadership and small business experience to the table. Additionally, Kimberly also founded Project Holiday Hope, which serves low-income families in mental health crisis by providing gifts and basic needs support during the holiday season. Last year, the project was able to provide over 500 gifts to families in Clark County who would not have been able to celebrate Christmas otherwise. She's the mother of 2 beautiful children, 1 dog, and 2 guinea pigs. Very excited. Very excited. Kimberly, welcome to From Misfit to Mystic. Let's dig in and let's talk about this very important subject that is near and dear to my heart. Kimberly, welcome to From Misfit to Mystic. I'm extremely excited you're here on the show, and I can't wait to dig into the subject matter because it's close to my heart, and I'm very impressed with what you're up to in the world. So let's start there. First of all, how are you doing? How are you feeling?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Lisa. I really appreciate it. I'm a fan of your work and been lucky enough to be the recipient. And I'm just so excited to be here to talk about mental health today.
Oh, I'm very happy about it too. So I want to know, can we just run back a little bit in time and talk about how did this unfold for you? How did you create Being UnNormal? What happened? What happened in your life that brought you to here?
Well, I mean, I think the story is long and tawdry, but the Cliff Notes version is,
Yeah.
about now it's about 11 years ago, I was married, and my husband at the time had a psychotic break. And as a result of that, it was from untreated depression. And as a result of that, it turned into and morphed into a paranoid schizophrenia.
Wow.
And it was a very scary and dangerous situation. Around that time, my, at the time, 5-year-old daughter she was exhibiting behaviors that I knew were more intense than her peer group. And we had had conversations with some of her daycare providers about some behavioral issues we had seen or they had seen in the classroom. But it kind of came to a feverish pitch around the same time that my ex-husband started exhibiting these really extreme behaviors and symptoms. My 5-year-old at the time had a huge explosion. And as a result, she wrote a suicide note and came up to me with a suicide note in hand. And she had a plan. She had a drawing. She had a plan. And I knew at that time the situation was desperate. And so cut to the chase, I ended up leaving my ex-husband
Mm.
and divorcing him, and I had 2 children at the time, and taking my 2 girls. And really then it became the journey of being the ex-wife to somebody who, is very, very ill, and being the mother of 2 children and going through their journey as their caregiver and parent, as I watched their mental health spiral out of control. And of course, I come with my own baggage, as
Right.
most of us do, in
Mm-hmm.
this day and age. I've battled myself with depression and anxiety in the past, so I have that firsthand experience.
Wow.
But really, Being UnNormal was born out of going through the process of watching what my children had to go through, and especially my oldest daughter, as she ended up going through a major psychiatric crisis, and really uh, losing a lot of my friends. I had lost my job. I almost lost the roof over my head. Going through that process when she was in crisis, trying to keep her alive. She was highly suicidal and required 24-hour supervision to make sure
Wow.
that she was safe.
Mm.
And that experience, I had heard a lot of judgment from people in my community. I had a lot of well-meaning people at the time tell me what I should and shouldn't do with my child.
Mm.
I had a lot of people have great suggestions, and I had a lot of people blame me and say that my poor life decisions was the reason this was happening, or I mean, and the list goes on. And really what I learned from that was that there was huge opportunities for education, because a lot of people had so much misconceptions and their own bias, and the stigma around mental health was really warping how they were interacting with me, my children. And this is from
Wow. Mm.
multi levels within the medical model, within the educational
Right.
system, all of this stuff. And so at that point I went, I got to a point, and I think that's the blessing and the curse of the situation, where I no longer cared what anybody thought of me.
Mm.
In that freedom, I went, now let's go ruffle some feathers and talk about mental health. And I'm very fortunate that my daughters are very supportive of this mission. My oldest daughter really doesn't care about anybody else's opinion, which, I think as an adult, I kind of a little bit envious of. And my youngest daughter actually was on my season finale this year talking about her suicide attempts. And so we now have become a family that, we continue in our own mental health journey and mental health struggles, depending on their diagnosis and how those symptoms are popping up. But we also are all on a mission to just debunk stigma and support people talking about a topic no one wants to talk about. So
Yeah.
that's how Being came into fruition.
Yeah. And when did you build this? When did it start? When did it turn into form? What
You
year
know,
was it? How long ago?
2016 is when
Okay.
things really started. And as
Okay.
I shared my story, parents started to come out to me secretly saying, oh, well, my daughter's struggling with this, and what are you doing? And I started kind of building this network,
Mm-hmm.
and became sought out online, and I started getting involved in activism. And by 2017, I really had hit the ground running, getting involved with some organizations like NAMI. And then I created a holiday giving program in 2017 for children that are in psychiatric crisis. Because one thing that I know for myself to be true, and I see this in other families, is that the finances are greatly affected. And a lot of these families are struggling to keep a roof over their head. And when I was going through everything within my divorce and the years of poverty after that, from for various different reasons, underemployment, no employment, having to lose employment because of caretaking for my children, Christmas was always a nightmare situation and stressful situation for me, because I knew I
Mm.
couldn't put anything under the tree. So I started this holiday giving program. I called it Project Holiday Hope.
Wow.
And in 2017, it was its first year, wildly successful. I partner with a community mental health agency here locally in Vancouver, Washington, and we give Christmas to those families, and it's so fulfilling. We did it in 17, we did it in 18, and we're going to be doing it in 19.
That's
So
incredible.
yeah, it's, we served, the first year we served like a handful of families. Last year we were able to get out over 500 gifts. We even got a used car to a family who had just become homeless. It was incredible. And
That's
so
amazing.
Yeah, so now I'm 3 years in, and I started the podcast last year. So
Yeah.
we're over a year in its inception. We're going into season 4, and that has just been so amazing to be able to bridge the gap between the personal experiences and getting that professional knowledge on top of that, so we can really give amazing education to people
I love
and
it.
empower them. And that really
Yeah.
is what it is empower the person, no
Mm-hmm.
matter where they're at. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been fantastic. It's been lovely.
Well, you know what? I have to tell you, first of all, Kimberly, like for me, it's close to my heart. I know we've talked a little bit about this because my brother was diagnosed schizophrenic, and I know firsthand what it's like to live with a mental ill person. I grew up in that environment, and I'm 55, so we're talking, 50 years ago, and there was no conversations around that. There was nothing going on around that. There was nobody who understood anything around it. And I knew instantly inside, like at times something was wrong. Like I could see my brother, his eyes would just go black,
Yes.
and I used to feel like he doesn't mean what he's doing. Like something's really wrong. He was very violent, and he did drugs at a young age, which totally snapped him into the illness. Like you can see from one age, 14, 15, I was younger than him, so I was 11 or 12, to like all of a sudden, like 16, he became Pentecostal. He became extremely religious, in addiction, and you could see that he just snapped. He left himself. And I remember being young and just feeling so much compassion for him. And back in the day, I mean, it's really, I really admire this because my brother went through a lot. We went through a lot as a family because of it. And nobody wanted to do with it. Nobody wanted to address it. No one wanted to talk about it. They were giving him major drugs like Haldol and all these kinds of drugs that basically broke him even more. So now in 2019, everything's changed. I know there's a lot more conversations, and I find it extremely interesting that what we went through was no conversations. Like actually, like, one flew over the cuckoo's nest. If you got put in the hospital, you got electric shock. Maybe they give you a lobotomy. Like it was really bad. And here we are with you, and we're having this conversation, and you're doing things that are, creating opportunities for people to learn more and understand more, but you're still going through certain stigmas and misunderstandings around what's going on. And that, this is like, these people are not outcasts. There's something happening here socially. Something's going on. So
Yeah.
I'm curious about what you think, like, what's really important for people, my audience here, to understand around mental illness? Like, what would you suggest? Where did they start from? Is it a place of acceptance, understanding? Like, talk to me about what you think. How can people learn about this?
Well, I think one of the challenges with mental illness is, versus anything that falls under what we would call a medical illness,
Yeah.
is that there is a perception because you can't see it, it doesn't exist. And
Yeah.
so when we see people that are struggling with diabetes and cancer, there are very easy diagnostic systems and treatment, and people tend to treat those a lot more compassionately because they feel like they're real. And for some reason, we
Mm-hmm.
have disconnected at the neck. So everything from the neck up just doesn't seem, we don't think of our brains
Right.
to be a part of our bodies. And the fact that our brains are electrical chemical systems,
Yeah.
they can go offline. So I always use epilepsy as an example, because 100 years ago, epilepsy was looked at as you were possessed by the devil, you needed a
Yes.
priest, you were sent away, right? You were sent away, locked away in an institution to
Yeah.
treat this because it was just some religious failing. And now, as science has progressed and as we have gained more technology, be able to see things in the brain and image the brain and understand these things, we now know that it's an electrical storm in your brain. You take medication, it quiets down the cell excitability, and it lets people live normal lives. It has nothing to do with Satan. So, 100 years ago, if you had somebody who had epilepsy or madness, or whatever they would use to call that, it was very hushed. Oh, Uncle Johnny, he's some kind of special, and we sent him away, right? He gets these shakes, and there was this hushness and the shame that came about it with these families. And nowadays we know, okay, you take an anticonvulsant, you're getting treatment. We know it's an electrical storm. And if you have epilepsy, now if you were to go up to somebody and say, hi, I'm Kimberly and I have epilepsy, the reaction would be, oh, wow, are you getting treatment? How does that affect your life?
Mm-hmm.
And we would treat that disclosure as something to be admired.
Yeah.
But yet with mental illness, when we talk about especially severe mental illness, or what's called SMIs, which are typically mood disorders, so bipolar, schizophrenia, psychosis, all that stuff, we, for some reason, don't make the correlation that this is all brains gone awry. So it's the same thing as epilepsy. It's just affecting different chemicals and different neural pathways in different points in the brain.
Yeah.
But it's doing a lot of the same thing. That's why we treat bipolar with anticonvulsants, the same medication as epilepsy, because it affects similar regions in the brain.
Yeah.
But again, for some reason, we have had to separate those, and we treat them differently. We have the medical model, and then we have the behavioral health model. So we have two different systems treating these things. Where really neuroscience and the advancement in neuroscience and neuropsychology is really teaching us to go from the neck up and look at this from a medical, scientific standpoint, and understanding the behaviors or symptoms of how it presents. So we have treated these as behavioral choices versus an illness that has a symptom and a cause. And this disconnection creates stigma and misconceptions that can prevent people from getting care that they need. It stops people from helping somebody that they love, or being too scared to admit it in themselves because they look at it as a character defect instead of having something wrong with them. If you broke your bone, you would go to the doctor.
Yep.
If your brain is breaking, you should go to the doctor.
Yeah.
And whatever doctor needs to be a part of that team, that all comes out in the wash. But we need to for understanding that the brain isn't just an online all the time thing, and we are all just one electrical misfire from having a very bad day. And if we treat that with compassion and understanding, knowledge, education, we are empowered to approach that whole system differently. And that's why it's so important for me to expose, and I work with people, to expose those limiting beliefs. The majority of us have misconceptions about really what mental illness is and how it impacts us. And especially parents, right? Because the struggle with parents is that we pull from these legacy parenting systems, the way that we were taught to parent our children, these legacy parenting styles that do not fit in the mental illness, mental health scheme. We have to parent differently. And a lot of the times parents feel like they're butting their heads up against the wall because they can't modify or change the behavior of their children that are in a mental health crisis. And when we use these outdated parenting styles, it can exacerbate a situation, because then as parents, we're putting our expectations, and people in adult relationships do this too. This the caregiver, somebody that's dealing with somebody who's mentally ill, be it a spouse or a parent. We have these stigmas, these concepts of mental illness, and then we react from those concepts. That's the stigma. So if we have bought in to what people say mental illness is, depression is laziness, or you just have to get over anxiety and just push through it, or whatever that looks like, right? People who have addiction should just be able to get sober like that. All of this stuff. If we buy into that, then we're going to be treating and interacting with people who are struggling with their mental health in a very biased way.
Absolutely. And we don't help them at all by being that way.
Correct.
Right? We really don't. We don't make them feel what they need to feel, which is understood and accepted, and just like You know, I think it's so very, very tough. I love what you're saying. I love it all because to me it means so much because of what I went through personally. And I think people need to understand. Like, I also, and tell me what you think about this. I believe people are terrified that that could happen to them. And that's why they really want to shove it under the bus because they're just absolutely terrified. Because the truth is, it's an organ. It can do that. It can break. It can misfire. It can electrically stop working correctly. You know, like I had hypoglycemia during a time in my life when I was really malnourished and I was going through severe addiction when I was young. I had hypoglycemia, which had the exact symptoms of schizophrenia, like literally. When
Yeah.
your brain chemistry stops working correctly, you get
Yeah.
some really crazy things going on in there. And I know, like, it's like if you meet a person who has diabetes and they're having a severe diabetic episode, they're hallucinating. They're not there anymore. Like, severe things are happening to the brain because the brain eats that sugar. If it doesn't have sugar correctly, it starts breaking down.
Yeah.
And any condition in the brain is just a brain condition. I love what you're saying. It means, like, it makes it so absolutely clear, acceptable, digestible, and it just makes sense. It really makes sense. So that's amazing. Like, first try to understand that the brain's an
Absolutely.
organ. You know what I
Well,
mean? Okay.
yeah, exactly. And what's challenging is that, medicine is slow. For everything that
Yeah.
it's fast, it's also slow.
Yeah.
So we have not had the technology or the ability to really understand the brain up until recently. So when the Human Genome Project came out, they were able to then understand more about the epigenetic factors, DNA markers, and understand some more of the biofactors,
Mhm.
biology type factors of the
Absolutely.
illnesses. And then with the invention of fMRI imaging, we're able to now see the brain.
Yes.
So we're slowly getting there, but it is a slow process. And part of that is due to funding. There's not a lot of funding for these types of things. It's becoming more prevalent, but, you know, when, at least in the US, we're a for-profit medical community here. And if there's no money to be made for it, there's no money to fund it. And
Yeah.
that can be really challenging. And so the
Heartbreaking.
insurance companies here are really the gatekeepers into being able to put money into these studies and into this technology that can help. It's getting better, but we still have a very long way to go.
Oh,
We now understand a lot more than we did even 10 years ago
yes.
because of the Human Genome Project. But yet we
Mhm.
still have so much farther to go to understand, you know, uh, markers, and understand how medications react. And then, I was actually, yesterday I was talking to a researcher from the University of Michigan. She's at the a bipolar research institute. And for me, as a parent, I of somebody of a child who has bipolar, it was like, it would just be so nice to be able to get a test, do a blood test, know exactly what we're dealing with and what
Right.
medications help. Wouldn't that be lovely, right?
Yeah.
But it's not so simple.
Yeah.
So, they're doing some amazing research around this now, but it's still going to take time. And that's the
Yeah.
hard part, is that it's patience. And a lot of this at this point is really trial and error, and people don't like that. It requires so much patience. And part of the problem, or some of the challenges around this too, is when you have a medical disease, you're treated in a hospital and then you come home. When you have mental health issues, behavioral health issues, unfortunately, a lot of the treatment falls upon the caregivers. So be it the parent or the spouse or whatnot, because all of that treatment is being done in the home environment. And that's incredibly exhausting, especially for that caregiver who just wants to, quote unquote, get back to normal. And
Yeah.
that's really, part of the struggle for these communities. And it can be so isolating because of the stigma piece. I know for
Yeah.
myself, it was, I lost a lot of friends. People just
Mm.
didn't understand. And
No.
that happens very frequently. So it's a very
Yeah.
isolating, it's very stressful, all of these different factors, because we just don't, we don't just put these people away anymore, right?
No, and
And there's
also,
pros and
yeah,
cons, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So
for
there's
sure.
so many challenges with this, but yet
Yeah.
there are breakthroughs coming down the pike, and we are finding new treatment options, and we are modifying some stuff that,
Mhm.
and it's evolving, and it's an evolution. As we further understand the brain, then we can help treat the brain.
Yeah,
So
like a couple of things from just to take some stuff away from what you're talking about here. And I had a memory of my brother. And at one point they found the cocktail that would work for him. Okay. I mean, this is like this is a 30-year story with my brother. And my father was still alive at the time, and he was living with my brother. Now my brother's in a group home. He's too dysfunctional to live with anybody. So they have to manage him because he really he's a bit far gone now. Unfortunately. Okay. But at one point they found a cocktail that really stabilized his mind. And
Yes.
I want to tell you what happened to me. It was crazy. He couldn't cope with the reality of his brain stabilizing because he remembered everything that he did. He remembered the things he did with me violently. He remembered the episode, and they had no treatment to help him deal with the fact that he was stabilizing, but he had been sick for so long and had done so many things that were dysfunctional or violent because of his condition, that there wasn't like a brain hospital for him to go to have all the things he needed emotionally, mentally, in his memories, in his trauma that was coming up because of it. He just couldn't get that help. So my brother started drinking alcohol to just screw up his cocktail that was working for him. He couldn't cope with it. It
No.
was so sad for me. Like, Kimberly, I was like, I think that's what's needed, is a brain hospital. Just same thing where there's all these people working with this condition, helping, like a rehabilitation experience. So we understand, we diagnose, we give treatment, we find a way, a platform to help people go to the next stages of their possibilities, depending how they heal. I mean, it's heartbreaking for me. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And so many other families that have experienced similar things to that. And we see
Okay.
a lot of addiction, especially in mood disorders. There's a
Yeah.
high level of co-occurrence.
Yeah.
And then, unfortunately, especially alcohol can actually exacerbate psychotic conditions, right? So
Totally. Yeah.
they start doing it to numb out. And then it ends up being quite problematic. THC, actually, they're doing a lot more studies in THC because of the paranoia factor. A lot of people self-medicate smoking marijuana, and now
Okay.
the studies are coming out showing some of, not CBD, but some of the psychotic features of prolonged use over time of THC. So it's
Makes sense.
it's really, yeah, it's
Yep.
so difficult, because I know, even in my own personal experience, when my daughter comes out off of an episode and she sees the damage that
Yep.
has been done, she's so remorseful, and then the guilt and shame cycle kicks in.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking to watch, because, and you said it earlier, the eyes go black. You
Yeah.
can literally see the moment their brain goes completely offline. It is
Yep.
visible, and it is frightening. And part of the violence and the frightening is a part of severe mental illness. And I'm saying severe mental illness because mental health is a spectrum.
Yeah.
We have general mental health, anxiety, depression, unipolar depression, things of that nature, that are a more manageable.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have mental illness, and that's when we
Mm-hmm.
start looking at mood disorders and anything that's neurodevelopmental. So ADHD, we know that there's neurodevelopment issues with ADHD. It's not
Yeah.
just behavioral issue. Bipolar, the severity and the spectrum of bipolar,
Yeah.
schizophrenia, and then we start going, and if we talk about the whole the neurodiversity spectrum, then we start moving into like antisocial, psychotic, psychopathic behavior. That's all part and parcel. And we can look at that whole spectrum and look at places now in the brain where we see those specific places go offline for all of those different diagnoses. So,
Wow.
it is a shame. I think what gets amplified in the media is some of the more scary experiences that we have encountered with mental illness. And I don't want to take that off the table, that is a reality, because
Yeah.
it is. Many
Yeah.
people have experienced that.
Yeah.
But on a whole, when we look at the numbers and the stats, we know that even the sickest population is more predisposition to actually be abused than to be the abuser. Because what
Mm-hmm.
can happen is they will be put in some of these really sketchy situations. Either they become homeless, which 90%
Yeah.
of the homeless population has severe mental illness or
Yeah.
mental illness, or they go into these sketchy group home, residential situations where
Yeah.
they're being when they're being abused, and that's really sad as well. So there's no, it's not that there isn't help, and we are getting better, but again, it's just a slow roll.
Yeah.
So the only thing that we can do, to help contribute to the overall change
Mm-hmm.
in the world is to, number one, change our viewpoint and understand where we may be wrong and how we perceive mental
I
health.
love it. Yeah.
And yeah, especially when we start looking at parents, and because I work with parents and I see this a lot, they don't want to admit their child is going through a mental health issue because they feel like it's a reflection of themselves. And they
Mm-hmm.
feel they would have to admit that they're a bad, quote unquote, bad parent if their child was depressed. And so for that's a huge sticking point, because the parent is the gatekeeper to care. That child cannot go get mental health care if the parents aren't on board. So if they don't want to admit that their child is depressed or anxious and get them help, that child's systems are going to exacerbate over time. And that's what we do know, is that things don't get better unless there's intervention. And the earlier you have intervention, the better, because we see what is reported in terms of, like yesterday we were talking about bipolar, and they said that the median onset age of bipolar is 25. That's only because that's being what's reported
That's
at
right.
that age.
That's
But
right.
when those people look back, they see that they exhibited symptoms of bipolar into
Way
their childhood.
before. Yeah. Yeah. My brother was like that. I remember, and I remember when my parents finally, like I remember sitting with them. I mean, I'm also who I am, so I could feel it. Intuitively, I knew. I'm like, my brother's sick, and no one would listen. They just didn't believe it. And I remember sitting with my parents, and they did all this stuff with him. Like I said, he's sick. Like something's wrong with him. He leaves. I see him. He leaves. He disappears. The brother I know when he was stable wouldn't be there anymore. So one of the things I've learned, like for me, I have a deep acceptance of it. Like that's, knowing my experience, tough experience, because I had to recover from the violence and the fear that I experienced as a person receiving that from a schizophrenic person. I know the trauma I experienced from dealing with that every day, and I know you're talking about that too. I mean, you're watching people you love, and there's a variety of it. And there's families right now that are going to listen to this, parents who may have judgment. Tell me about what you would say to them. Like, where do they start? Just like, here's where you start. This is what you can do as a parent right away if you see an instability in your child.
Exactly. Well, here in the United States, what
Yeah.
I tell parents when they say, I think something's wrong,
Yeah.
when they get to a point where like something's not right, when you listen to your gut, your truth is always within you, regardless if you want to argue with it.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is always the reality. So I would say tune in, listen, just take your own judgment and perception out of it and say, do I think something could be off here? That's,
Yeah.
Start off with that question. Is something not just right?
Yeah.
And if you say yes to that, and if you can't start to dispute it, or you have to argue with yourself to get to that no answer, then the first stop is to go to your primary care physician or your doctor. Depending on, and this is where it gets a little hectic here, depending on your insurance, that really starts to dictate which path you're going to go down.
Yeah.
So, going to the doctor, getting that documentation, saying, look, this is what I'm seeing, and start to track and trend what you're seeing. Start to, look at mood. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they withdrawing? Are they irritable? Are they angry? Like, start to look at their mood. Are they slowly losing interest in activities that they no longer enjoy, or they used to enjoy and they no longer enjoy? Look for some of those flags, and then start to look at, well, how much are they eating and how much are they sleeping? Sleep has a huge impact.
Yeah.
So start tracking those things. And what I did back in the day is I just had a calendar, and I would write a smiley face, a sad face, or a neutral face, and I would put how many hours of sleep my child was having. And it just was that simple for a while.
That's
And
amazing.
I started to see trends: less sleep, worse mood. Okay. So then you're starting to, what I call, data gather. You're starting to gather the data that you're going to bring to the doctor and say, look, Over the last couple of weeks, I've seen these persistent symptoms. My daughter's doing XYZ, or my son is doing XYZ. He's snapping at me. He's irritable. I have uncontrollable crying. All of a sudden, they're scared to leave the house. All of a sudden, they feel like something bad's going to happen to them with no real justification for that. All these different little things. Gather that information, track it in one place, take it to the doctor and say, this is what I'm thinking is going on, or I'm concerned. The doctor's going to take a look at that data, ask some questions, and then probably refer you out or make a recommendation to see a therapist. And if it's severe enough, they'll also probably make a recommendation to see a psychiatrist if medication is needed.
Yeah.
So it just depends. So that tracking, as a parent, you have that first line of being able to really see, but that has to come with awareness and not judgment, just acceptance, like you said earlier, of what the situation really is.
Yeah.
And then from there, those paths then divide, and hopefully your child ends up getting treatment.
Absolutely. See, so the thing what I'm hearing is you're saying, make it about observing more than anything else. Like, really pay attention to your child, trust your gut, follow signs, look for evidence, just relax, don't take it personal. I mean, this is your baby. If you're, it's like you just want to show up in that way just in case, because it's really important. And also, you do this kind of work, you do this coaching work with parents and people as well, so they can contact you as well, which is like, I think that could be something extremely important for people to understand, just to understand the details. I mean, having support by somebody who's been through it, who knows a lot of it, you have a ton of information that you're just like a powerhouse of knowledge here for, something that's really misunderstood, which I really, really appreciate. I really do. I wish I met you when we were going through it as a family, because it was quite something. My parents, both of them, the most painful thing for me that I watched was my brother was sick. And my father, he ended up moving away and being in a really weird situation with this woman who was sick also. And my father just threw money at it. He didn't know how to handle it. He couldn't accept it. So he threw money at it and let them deal at the other side of the world, out west. I'm on the East Coast, on the West Coast. And then, 20 years later, my brother came back, he had to deal with him anyways. And I remember telling my dad, it's like, wouldn't it have been better just to understand what was going on with him and try to know? Because if you give a mentally ill person money and more money, they're just going to do really things that are going to harm them. Like, my brother drank and he got into drugs, and it's like, he's so afraid to deal with reality that my father just threw money at it, and it didn't help. My mother too, she just ignored it. And I don't think they really wanted to. I just think they were so afraid and uneducated.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And, I think a lot of people do the best that they can do.
Yeah.
But that's exactly why I wanted to start the podcast.
Absolutely.
Give a free resource for people to start to understand, because there's I touch on so many different topics.
Yeah. And
I wanted people to understand some of the truth, and then also find those resources. So there's a lot of great information out there. There's great organizations like NAMI that know the mental health world kind of in and out, politically, all the way down, the structures all the way down. But there's also a ton of misinformation out there too.
Oh yeah.
And so, especially on all these private Facebook groups and things of that nature, you have to, I just say, use a high level of discernment to see what's going to work and what's going to not. They can get very volatile in those groups.
Right.
That was disheartening for me to go in there. I wanted to be supported, but I also wanted practical tips and strategies to be able to move forward, because nothing changes unless something changes. And if you're kind of navigating a new world and new systems and different ways of interaction and building new concepts around those, none of that is going to happen if you stay in the old information, and if you continue to believe and buy into the stigma of it all. So, and a lot of that, it can be very isolating. It's very hard on the caregiver. It's very isolating for the caregiver. And it doesn't have to be. If you can tap into the resources that are there
Yeah.
and be able to utilize those and learn your new normal. And that's how being, though, even the title of Being UnNormal, you know,
Yeah.
when we were going through crisis, I kept waiting to go back to normal. When is my child going to get normal again? When are we going back to normal? And then I really had the deep realization is this is my new normal. And all caregivers, all people struggling with mental illness hit a point where they're going to have to accept that they have a new normal, an unnormal. And that's okay. And we can celebrate neurodiversity, and we can celebrate
Absolutely.
not being normal and embrace,
Absolutely.
accept it, and be empowered by it. Move
Yeah,
forward.
that's beautiful. And I mean, I really feel just thrilled about this conversation, honestly, because I know there's lots of parents out there. You know, I have, personal feelings about what's going on, and, a lot of ideas, and, I've tapped into lots of information personally about, like, you know, why are children growing up so much more with so many more mental kind of conditions they're dealing with? Why is every kid ADHD now? Like, I mean, it's an epidemic here in Canada, in Montreal in particular. Like, I have every second parent's telling me my kid's on pills, my kids. And I'm like, I just have a hard time believing that every person is that unstable. I think, like, there's a lot of things going on that we need to understand, like food, like things like sweeteners, sugar. What are we eating? How are we, like, digesting? And what are we putting in our brains and our minds? Are we getting enough? Like, there's so much, the internet, like the speed with which kids are, their brain can't keep up with what they're visually seeing. I think there's so many factors,
It's multifactorial. I mean, that's the broad answer, is that there are many different factors that are coming to play into this. One of those factors is that these mental health issues have always existed. We may have not saw them for what they were.
Yeah.
So although we have some abnormally high, some over-diagnosing in certain areas, we still have under-diagnosing in some of those areas.
Okay.
And it's so individual. There are many factors. We know that there's a connection with our gut biome and the manufacture of serotonin and dopamine. 90% of serotonin is manufactured in the gut.
Yep.
So if we have a poor diet, that's going to inhibit our ability to manufacture serotonin, which is going to lead us to higher rates of depression and anxiety, right?
Yep.
So there is that. There are these social economic factors of when we think about poverty and what is happening to the here in the middle class, and the stress of not being able to afford anything. People are losing their homes and not being able to feed themselves. We know that trauma embeds into the DNA and then is passed down intergenerationally. And so they've done tons of studies to show that we now have more occurrence of violence that we are being exposed to on a daily basis. And like you said, we're getting constantly bombarded, but that is retraining our neural pathways, right? That it does something. So there are all these different factors that come into play. And, with my youngest daughter, we went to a neuroscience lab, and she had to go through a 6-hour evaluation. They did cognitive testing, emotional testing, all these different tests to get a diagnosis. So a lot of times, sometimes when we see possible overdiagnosis, is because they may not be in the right specialist, or their primary care physician has just kind of labeled this just because of the symptoms that are reported, and it still can be very subjective. My youngest daughter does have ADHD, and for her, Ritalin is a lifesaver. I actually got a message from her teacher today going, I had to go talk to Ella today because she was, a little fidgety and she told me she accidentally forgot her meds today. I mean, it is that obvious for us.
Absolutely, when the condition's there, of course. 100%.
And so and some parents with children with a very mild form of ADHD don't have to medicate. They're able to change the diet and the food, and that works too. So and so that's when it becomes okay. The diagnosis itself is a framework, but we manage the symptoms that are impacting function, and that's the component that a lot of people forget. How is that diagnosis? How is their behavior impacting the function of their life? And how are we going to address the
Mm-hmm.
symptoms of that
Mm-hmm.
behavior, the causes of those behaviors, so we can change the quality of life. And that
Mm-hmm.
really has to be the focus, right? It's not, I want Johnny to stop jumping off the couch. It is,
Absolutely.
why is Johnny jumping on the couch, right?
Yes. Yes.
What's happening here? What is the underlying issue, or the, what I like to talk about a lot is the unmet need of the child. The behavior is
I
a
love
simple
it.
unmet need.
Yep.
And that's true of most people. We all
Yep.
have unmet needs, and our behavior is symptomatic of those unmet needs. So in terms of mental illness, really not getting too hung up on, does it have to be meds or food, or why is this happening or anything? It just is. At any time function is impacted, there needs to be an intervention.
I love
And
it.
whatever that intervention is, yoga, meditation, diet,
Mm-hmm.
exercise,
Mm-hmm.
it's all great. Do
Yeah.
it all. Find
Yeah.
what works for you, because it's very individual. Everybody's brain is different. I
Yeah.
know for me, medication is a huge part of our life, and it
Yeah.
happens to be very impactful. My daughter has bipolar, and we know
Mm.
in that type of illness, it does need to be managed with medications, just because of the
Absolutely.
way that the brain is designed.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily true for somebody who may be just struggling with unipolar depression
Yeah.
and is able to make some lifestyle changes and get some therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, whatever that looks like for them, and
Mm-hmm.
able to retrain their brain to think differently and
Yeah.
alleviate that
I
depression,
love
or
it.
manage anxiety. So
Amazing. No,
yeah.
honestly, it's so important and incredible information. That's what I was saying. Like, there's such an epidemic, and there's so much reality in the epidemic. You know what I mean? It's totally like completely. I've had this experience with my own brother. Difference from one without pills, without alcohol. I also had a friend at one point too that was like, they changed her medication. She was bipolar, diagnosed bipolar. So they changed her medication. She 911 me. I found her on the floor in a fetal position just from the change. Her body was like, that's not going to work. And I was like, wow. And I just stayed with her
Whoa.
and calmed her down. No, I did. I mean, I walked in her house and I just sat with her on the floor because I was able to accept her condition without judgment or fear. And I think this is really important for people to understand. You don't have to be afraid. You're just trying, but just her, like, as an example, because I was there, and I could just talk her down off that ledge, she was able to calm down because the mind started going wherever it was going. And then we went and saw the doctor, and she got herself all, corrected. This is
Sorted out. Yeah.
I
And
want
I
to
think
know.
you just touched upon a really important point that it jogged something that I did want to touch upon, and
Absolutely.
that's suicide and suicidality. And
Yeah.
I really want your audience to understand, by talking about suicide does not mean it's going to introduce the thought or make somebody
Mhm.
suicidal. We know that that's not true.
No,
In
for sure.
fact, the opposite is true. It actually alleviates the stress off of the person that may be feeling suicidal, and it opens
Absolutely.
the door to conversation. And it can be a very, very awkward, uncomfortable situation, but it's so important for people to understand that it's a direct question. It's not, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Do you feel suicidal? Do you want to die? Do you have a plan?
Mm-hmm.
Asking the direct questions, and then if you get a yes on those, to sit with them like you did for your friends. Sit with them and be
Oh
with
yeah.
them so you can get help. Find an emergency room, call your doctor, call
Yep.
the therapist, call the psychiatrist, whatever that team looks like. But please do not buy into one of the biggest myths that you've been told. Talking about suicide does not make anybody suicidal. They've already entertained the
Of
thought.
course. Of course.
So I
100%. That's a
definitely
brilliant point. So
throw that
important.
gauntlet down.
No, but that's a brilliant and important point. You know what happened with my girlfriend in that moment? I just didn't leave her side. Like, I think that was very significant for me, and my brother too. Like, there were times sometimes you just have to. Your acceptance is a feeling that you transmit to another person, which allows them to relax. Because the minute, like, she went into like, something's wrong, and she had to deal with that thought.
Yeah,
So I was
absolutely.
able to help her go, this is exactly what's wrong. You changed your meds. We're going to go to the doctor immediately tomorrow morning. I'm going to stay here all night with you. Like, boom, calm down. So the minute her brain heard me, she was able to shift. She didn't
Yes.
feel better, but she was able to just stay with me more calmly and know that I understood what was happening. So it was okay. Not
You
every kid.
held that space
Yeah.
for her. And that's something that a lot of parents, because they're bringing their own baggage into that escalation,
100%.
may
Yeah,
just kind of intermittently make it worse
they
because
do.
they come with fear
Yes.
and we respond to each other's energy. So, I mean, number one, I applaud you for,
Thank
holding
you.
that space for your friend. It was probably a life-saving maneuver. And, it's very difficult, but it's absolutely doable if we come into those spaces with compassion and understanding
Yep.
versus fear or blame or judgment. The outcome is different.
Mm-hmm.
The outcome is you're saving this person's life, and this is, that's what it really
Totally.
comes down to. I
Yeah.
remember my daughter told me, we had conversations when she stabilized about her suicidality, and she said, "Mom, do you know why I didn't kill myself?" And I said, "No, why didn't you attempt to kill yourself?" And she said, "Because I knew it would break your heart, and the
Oh,
one thing I knew through all of this is how much I loved you."
and that's huge.
it
And
was
that's
it was
huge.
enough to keep her alive, and you know what, I'll take it.
Huge.
I'll
I,
take it.
I totally a safe
love
place to
love
fall.
conquers all.
Right? That's like so important. Like such a valuable statement to make. Like your love, your acceptance that you shared gave her that consciousness that her brain couldn't get without that feeling. It's so important. Like I think this subject for me, because I know so many parents going through challenges and this it's just, it's a really hard time because of a lot of reasons, as you know. So the work that you're doing means so much to me, and I know it means so much to. It will mean a lot to other people that are going to listen to this show. I want to know a couple of other things, okay? Because I think what you're doing is brilliant, and I want people to be able to reach out to you. So the podcast is called Being UnNormal. It's Being
Yes.
UnNormal podcast. Where can they find it?
So you can find it directly on our website, www.beingunnormal.com, and that's going to be two N's, unnormal.
Yep.
We're also on all major like podcast players, so
Yep.
Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, all of those, podcast players. You can find us. Just bring up Being UnNormal. The easiest way is just to go to our website. We have all of our episodes on online on our website, and they're all free and available. So
Amazing.
depending on what you use to listen to your music, you can also
Mm-hmm.
listen to the podcast. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so you can find us anywhere, just Being
And
UnNormal.
tell me about how people can work with you. I
So
want
if
them
you're
people to
yeah,
know how to work with you.
absolutely. So there's two ways. Either you can get in touch with me directly by emailing me at beingunnormal@gmail.com,
Yeah.
or go online to my website. I have information about our boot camp, and there is a button there you can click, and you can just book a call with me, get on my schedule, and then we can have a conversation and make sure that it's an appropriate time and place to be able to work with a coach versus maybe a mental health professional, and do
Yeah.
that assessment, and we'll talk it out and make sure that you're a right fit to work with me, and then we start on your journey. And it's such
Mm-hmm.
a rewarding journey. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing. It's such a
Well,
blessing to work with
right.
everybody. I love it. I love
Oh,
it.
you must, because there's two things I know about you. One of them is you're packed with experience. And second of all, you're honest. You're not going to like lead somebody down a road that they don't belong on. That's very clear from sharing with you and knowing you, that you wouldn't do that. It's really important that people get the help they need, because this is a very serious issue for families,
Absolutely.
and
And I've been very
individuals.
lucky that I've built a referral network. So if somebody is in needing of a therapist, I'm going to refer them out, especially locally. I do a lot of
Amazing.
work with a lot of therapists here, and we work in conjunction with each other. We refer each other because there are appropriate times and places. And like you said, yeah, there's an ethical responsibility to know
Yeah.
where that boundary lies.
I love it. I really love it. And I love it that you're moving towards the front lines and helping just regular folk understand what's going on, and that they're not alone. A big part of that is people feel alone. They don't know how to just feel comfortable with their circumstances. It's so interesting because a parent wouldn't have a problem if their child was diabetic, but a parent may feel so uncomfortable about mental illness issue because they don't know what to do. And there's not enough information and acceptance. And, I have two other things that are really important to me that I want your advice on for the audience themselves. First is, if the doctor just throws pills at your child, and a parent will be like, okay, we'll just administer these pills. But sometimes I guess it might happen that they just saying, here, take this, and it doesn't work or nothing changes. What would you advise parents to do? Like, what's the checkup point? Like, doctor, is it doctor, therapist, psychologist? Like, what's the best protocol for someone to follow?
So, it is situational depending on the
Okay.
severity level,
Yeah.
but always medication should never be the first line of defense, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
If you go see your doctor and, the first thing that's being presented to you is medication, I would
Yeah.
say be very cautious and leery. One of the things about being a parent of a child with emotional special needs is that you learn to advocate. You have to be an advocate, and you will be pushing back on different systems, the medical system, the educational system, the criminal justice system. So all these start to come into play. And so be weary. Um,
Okay.
typically, um, because of insurance, you need that PCP referral to go see a therapist. And that's kind of why that's that first line of defense. I always think therapeutical intervention is the first stop.
Okay.
Finding a therapist, and you may go and meet a few therapists before you find one you connect with, and that's okay too. Not
Yeah.
everybody, not
Very important.
everybody's for everybody.
That's
But
right.
you're going to want to look at the type of therapy and the experience that therapist has. Do they specialize in depression? Do they specialize in OCD? Do they specialize, what do they do?
Mm-hmm.
And then make that appointment with the therapist, and then working in conjunction with your therapist to see if medication would be appropriate.
Okay.
And therapists typically have a good ear to the ground on that, and if
Mm-hmm.
somebody is coming in with psychotic depression, they're going to see that fairly quickly, and then they'll be able to assess and say, pull somebody in on the team if that's appropriate, and there's releases, blah blah blah.
Perfect.
To say, hey, I think Johnny may need to go to the doctor and get something, or we need to get a psychiatrist involved, and here's my referrals. Here's what I recommend. And ask your therapist for recommendations, and then you can find a psychiatrist to do the medication management piece.
Perfect.
So yeah,
Very important.
That's typically how I would navigate that.
Mm-hmm. And do you recommend also that parents find groups, or do you have like obviously to me, just the podcast alone, like go listen, because there's, just going to be a ton of information you're offering even here. Like, I mean, just this small show here is like just packed with information from you. So that's really important. Get support. Parents need to get support. People need to get support.
Yes.
Make sure that they move towards allowing themselves to deal and find out and discover the experience of the truth, like what is really going on here, and give them a chance to do it patiently and lovingly. Like, because I think part of, like my parents were distraught. They didn't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
They never helped themselves over it. They just suffered over it.
Yeah,
You know
absolutely.
what I mean? And
And I think that groups are important, but I will go back to kind of the beware. The same thing with the internet. Look for a group that has structure and maybe affiliated with a bigger organization. So NAMI does free support groups. They're a great organization.
Okay.
To go, you can check out their website. It's N as in Nancy, M as in Mary, I.org, NAMI.org. And they have lots of free support groups. The part of the problem is people can do support groups, but they end up being a bitch session, to be quite honest.
Yes, I've seen
What
that.
you need is structure in those meetings, because you need to go and be able to find solace in community, but also you need to start using them as self-care and self-recovery in these situations. There and can be a lot of trauma that attaches in these situations. So making sure that you're taking care of yourself and utilizing appropriate resources.
And for you as a parent, and I mean, we didn't even really get into your life experience, which I know a little bit about. I couldn't be prouder of you as a human being. Like, it's just unbelievable. Like, you're like a walking miracle as far as I'm concerned. And your children too, that they have you, and they had someone who fought for themselves, which gave them, the courage to fight for themselves too, so important. Your greatest learning from all of these experiences has been what? What have you understood, or what has been the
as the
powerful
parent,
gift in it. Yeah. Yeah.
the biggest lesson is it's not about me.
I love it. Yeah.
It has
I agree.
nothing to do with me. And when
Mhm.
I take myself out of the equation, my hurt, my trauma, my ego, my bullshit,
Yep.
and it becomes about my child. And that's where it should be about.
Yeah. I
Their
love it.
pain, their symptom management, their recovery, their stability.
Right. And isn't that why you're all here now? Because
Absolutely.
without you as that role model, I don't think the kids would be here now.
Well, I've been very fortunate enough to have some amazing people in my life that helped
Of
guide me
course.
through this
Yeah.
process as well.
Yeah.
Um, but I know that that is hard found. And so
Mhm.
that was my note to myself. If I get through this, I will be
Right.
the change I want to see, and I can be that for somebody else. And now I am.
Look at that. And tell me about this adolescent mental health summit. Can we tell everybody about that? What is that?
So last year, in conjunction with the Camas Wellness Festival, I produced and put on the Adolescent Mental Health Summit. So we ran um, speakers all day long in two different rooms talking about various mental health issues. We had a panel discussion on suicide. We had a panel discussion on just teen life, addressing things like social media
Amazing.
usage and things like that. So I was on
Incredible.
the panel. I ran a panel, and then I ran the event. So it was very impactful. We had 300 people come in and out,
Incredible.
which was amazing. And now I got to start to gear up and do it again. But this year I want to actually make it a mental health summit, and one space run it for adolescents, and the other space run it more adult oriented.
Phenomenal. And where is this going to be and when?
This the when is TBD. It probably I'm
Okay.
shooting for the beginning of November. We had it towards
Okay.
the end of October last
Okay.
year, and this happens in Camas, Washington, which is
Perfect.
the Portland metro area. So it's
Okay.
just right over the river in Vancouver, Camas, Washington, and I'm really excited to be able to do that education piece. That is a huge part of my mission.
This is incredible. And we'll have all the links so you guys, you'll be able to find what Kimberly's up to and all these incredible experiences. The gift that you've given me today is just, really being able to talk about something that has been a painful part of my journey and making it like turning it right into solution making and helping people. To me, that's like critical. And I know there's a lot of people who feel very alone with this subject and really don't even realize that maybe there is a mental health issue going on with their child or with themselves or with somebody in their family. And they might not know what to do. I mean, I've bumped into so many people like that. So the fact that we're here and we're doing this means a lot. And I know my audience will be really happy to hear what you have to say and, pass it on. If you know somebody, please pass it on. And just know that it's okay to talk about, like it's okay to share the wisdom of this experience here.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for letting me come and talk with you today.
for sure.
It's such a pleasure. And hopefully this will, like you said, be the impetus for somebody to say, it's time. It's
I'm
time.
sure, I'm sure it will. I really am. I'm sure it will. And either way, you're touching so many people. I'm extremely proud of the work you're doing. It takes real courage to be able to stand up and say, hey, people, and you're going to be a huge change maker in this industry for sure. Thank you so much. I honor you so much. So you're
My
such a
pleasure. Thank you.
blessing. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I hope all of you have enjoyed this show, and feel free to comment, reach out to Kimberly, let her know you heard her on the show today, and we'll see you on next time.
Yes, thank you. Take care, everybody.
You're so welcome.